Hi, this is Ryan, and this is my update number 2 on my Capstone. Just a recap for you guys, my Capstone is focusing on player predictions and specifically NFL wide receiver stats per game. So last time in my first update one, I was having trouble with kind of converting my JSON into a usable CSV format, given the way the JSON was structured. Luckily, I was able to get it into a CSV finally. So within the CSV, each row represents a player for each game and their stats. These stats include things such as passing, rushing, receiving, defensive stats. And then from there, I began my performance on the EDA of the data set. For my Capstone specifically, I wanted to focus on receiver stats, so I mainly looked at EDA around that. For receiving yards, I saw the distribution was skewed a lot, as well as there being some collinearity between various receiving stats, which makes sense. After I kind of performed this EDA, I kind of noticed the biggest problem with this was that my data set wasn't formatted in a correct way, where my data set wasn't just solely on receivers. It had a data set of all players because I want to be able to account for that. But since I was just taking all the players and looking at their stats, some players, such as a defensive player, wouldn't have stats at all on their receiving, passing, or rushing because they just don't play offense. So what I've learned from that was that before I could actually do like a full-blown EDA deep dive into my data, I actually needed to create some features and engineer some features in order to append onto the receivers that I'm trying to predict and get a complete sense of how they may perform. So looking at feature engineering, the biggest thing is I wanted to make sure that any features I was creating for a specific wide receiver didn't have any future leakage within the data, since given that we're trying to predict a player's performance for a particular game, you won't know that game's stats until that game actually ends. So the way I decided to do this was to calculate rolling averages for these different features. So to start off, I wanted to focus on the player specifically, the wide receiver, and calculate their rolling averages for stats such as receiving yards, targets, catches, that sort of thing. For this, I created 3, 5, and 10 game windows to kind of like compare them and see that player's performance in the most recent games and how consistent they are over a long period of games in performing. From there, I went to move on to calculate team performance stats. So rather than focusing on that wide receiver, I looked at what team they were on and how their team performed offensively. So this is things such as total yards, rushing yards, passing yards, the amount of turnovers that team might have had. And then for this, similar to wide receivers, I calculated these on a rolling average, where we kind of wanted to see how that team performed within the past 3 games compared to the past 10 games or the whole season, in order to kind of see how this may affect a wide receiver's performance. Lastly, the big one I wanted to kind of feature engineer was the opponent defensive stats. So for an upcoming game, depending on which team they were playing, I wanted to grab the opponents from that team and look at that opponent's rolling average stats over the 3, 5, and 10 game interval as well. And for this, I mainly wanted to focus on defensive players. So for this, for every wide receiver, there would be the opponent they were playing, and then that opponent's rolling averages of things such as passes defended, turnovers, tackles, sacks, etc., things such as that. One also thing that I decided to include and create was kind of these consistency metrics. So this is basically looking at like the team performance and kind of the standard deviation of how the team performed over the past couple of games, because just based on how games are, one team could be performing really poorly one game and just have a crazy game the next game. And we wanted to make sure that I accounted for that potentially within my data and the models I'm building. So that is where I have been so far with my capstone. I think the next steps for me is I really want to reperform EDA and actually see all these features and how they correlate with one another, and kind of give me a sense of what my data set is. And then from there, potentially add or remove features I created through the feature engineering process to get the most valuable metrics to utilize within my models without making it overly complicated and complex for those models. Because as of right now, I have probably about 100 features. So, yeah, so that is my updates on my capstone so far. Any suggestions would be great. Thank you.